Good afternoon. Welcome to another OhioX Tech Tour. We're really excited to get started today. We have a tremendous lineup of technology professionals from across Southwest Ohio that have been building companies, building ecosystems, and we're very much looking forward to learning more what's going on. As a reminder, I'm Chris Berry. I'm the president of OhioX. And this is part of our statewide tech tour series. So this is just another stop to hopefully help share stories, connect leaders, and tell the rest of the state and beyond what's been going on in Ohio's technology and innovation spaces. The series is 10 weeks with 10 cities and 10 events. So we've been all across the state. Cincinnati's today, and then we'll continue on for the tour. We're talking to leaders from diverse backgrounds. We've had conversations with startup founders, from entrepreneurial ecosystem builders, technology professionals at big corporations, and more. And so we're really excited to talk to three more today and learn what's going on in Cincinnati in the tech and innovation space. Because of COVID, kind of the elephant in the room, we're all virtual. And hopefully future years we can have an in-person component to this. But today we're all virtual, and we're excited to be welcoming people from across the state, Cincinnati and beyond to this event. So thank you very much for attending. Before I start, want to thank our sponsor for the series, HMB. HMB helps mid-market companies and governments innovate and grow using cloud platforms and automation. HMB believes you don't have to have a bottomless IT budget to reach your full potential. For more information on HMB, please visit their website at hmbnet.com. Now I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. We'll start with Alison Sathe, who is the founder at ClearMark and also Regulatory Mark. ClearMark is an electronic QMS specifically developed for medical device entrepreneurs, designers, and manufacturers. Welcome, Alison.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So do you want to kind of share a little bit about ClearMark and what you've built with Regulatory Mark and who you are and your background and what you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to be here today. So I'm a biomedical engineer by training and have spent my career in medtech, so for regulatory and quality affairs. And I've been a consultant here in Cincinnati since 2014. That's the start of Regulatory Mark, which is the consulting arm of our company. And we help companies, medtech companies, go through the FDA and with their compliance issues and during their product development. And one of the things that we saw was a real lack in the quality management system side. So we developed ClearMark just a few years ago and have introduced it to the market just recently. It's an electronic quality management system. It's cloud-based. And it's really meant to enhance innovation, get your products to market faster, and provide some solutions for medtech innovators, small businesses, and large businesses who want to focus on medtech innovation.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Alison, and looking forward to hearing more about your background and what you've built with your two companies. Next up is Eric Weissmann, Vice President for External Relations at Cintrifuse. Eric was part of the founding team, and he's responsible for the strategy, messaging, branding, and positioning for this regional effort to catalyze growth through attracting and retaining startups. And Eric, before I let you share a little bit about you, Cintrifuse is a really fascinating model, and I hope people that are on this event today, not from Cincinnati, from other cities in Ohio or elsewhere, really listen to what you all have built at Cintrifuse, because it's a fascinating collaboration between a technology innovation startup business ecosystem in Cincinnati.
Great. Well, thanks. Yeah, pleasure to be on here, and thanks for shining a little bit of the spotlight on our corner of the state. But yeah, I've been with Cintrifuse for 7 years. Actually, today is my 7th year anniversary. So if you hear construction, they're unveiling a statue of me out front of Union Hall. No, I kid. But I've been through a lot. I like to say that I was here when we were making things up. We're still making things up as we go along in pure startup fashion. But you hit the nail on the head. And I'll try not to use the word ecosystem too many times, but if we can make a drinking game out of that, that might make this lunch hour go by faster. But that's what we're trying to do here, is build an ecosystem. And it does take collaboration this brand that we have put around our ecosystem, what we refer to as Startup Cincy, existed for years, decades. But what we tried to do is to get everybody rowing in the same direction, so we can get to our destination faster and find out what happens when we're all working together and when no one gets the credit. And that's kind of the goal of what we're trying to do at the end of the day, give people a reason to move to or stay in the greater Cincinnati region.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Eric, and congratulations on the 7 years. I actually have my UC Lindner College of Business mug from one of my last trips to Cincinnati, although it's just tea, so it's not a true drinking game. But thanks for being here. And our last person on our lineup is Don Wright. Don is the founder, president, and CEO of Clarigent Health. Clarigent Health has developed a system using artificial intelligence and machine learning to study a person's language and speech patterns to detect warnings of distress, suicide, and other types of behavioral health issues. And Don was also head of and spent the past decade growing OhioX Health from tech at, Mayo Clinic, Cincinnati Children's, to a company of nearly 500 employees, serving over 1.5 million people with mental health conditions. And they were acquired in 2016. So Don has worked on a number of fascinating technology projects and spending it out from research institutions like universities. So, which is, I think, very timely for Ohio and Cincinnati, because there's a ton of great work and collaboration happening there. So Don, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. That was a really long intro. So from a personal standpoint, I think you just heard everything about me, except that I think something that's interesting from my perspective is that I've spent the last 20 years building startups in greater Cincinnati. So, obviously OhioX is the most successful one. Hopefully Clarigent will eclipse that. But I've moved from from an ecosystem that actually basically barely deserved air quotes around it, with really no support services or VCs or any type of real funding opportunity, other than a few that we all know that don't exist anymore, to a very vibrant community where I joke about it, and I don't mean this in an arrogant way, I mean it in the exact opposite way. 10 years ago, there was no chance that OhioX wasn't going to win any startup award that happened in town, because there wasn't a whole lot else going on. And now we don't even get nominated for some of the categories at Clarigent because there's so many great things going on. But real quick, Clarigent, like you said, I mean, we are, it's all technology that came out of Cincinnati Children's. Cincinnati Children's is a huge partner for us. If people don't know, Cincinnati Children's is the largest pediatric research center in the world. So I think people who live here think it's where you take your kid when they have the flu or when they break their arm, which is true, but there's a lot of other things going on there. And we've been fortunate now to bring another technology out of there to try to help prevent suicide. Right now we're in multiple schools in the region, but also in Washington and Minnesota, and universities, and a hospital system in North Carolina. And our first commercial product, so we're in pilots right now. Our first commercial product actually is coming out on Friday. So.
Well, congratulations. Lot to celebrate on this video, this Zoom event today. But I think that's probably a good place to start, because, and Eric, maybe we can go with you of being at Cintrifuse, which has played such a massive role, and those things don't exist everywhere. So maybe right. A little bit of a background in two parts of Cintrifuse, how it came to be, but then also just the evolution of the tech community within Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So Cintrifuse was a brainchild of this group of the top 30 or so CEOs in town, a group called the Cincinnati Business Committee, and every major city has its group like that exists, throughout, no matter what mayor is in office or who's running the county or whatever. The businesses that call this region home get together, and I call them like a horizon looking group, like, what should we be worried about? So this group, the CBC, there was a couple two really critical things that happened about probably 10 years ago now. One was that Chiquita moved out of town. So we lost a Fortune 500 company. And then our airport, CBG, lost its hub status with Delta. So that was kind of two quick, left and right hooks that woke everybody up to say, what are we doing to remain relevant? And to, from an economic development standpoint, we've got instruments like Jobs Ohio and the chamber that were doing their part to woo big businesses. But what were we doing for the small businesses, for startups specifically, for high growth companies, for tech and tech enabled? And they commissioned the McKinsey Group to do a study on our innovation economy, which is kind of like paying somebody $300,000 to tell you your baby is ugly, which we already knew. But that's what they did. And the McKinsey study came out with a bunch of different findings, and I'll boil those down into just basically three. One, you need more money from the outside. If you as a region want to grow, you can't keep asking the same 5 people for money. We need to have a way to get more capital in from the outside. The second thing was, you've got an ecosystem here. Like I said, there's a bunch of different players. There's an accelerator here, a university there. It's kind of like everybody's playing their own note, but it's not making a song. It's just you need a conductor of the orchestra. And then the third thing is, there should be some center of gravity, some belly button around which everything orbits, some edifice, a building that people from out of town, if you're out of there, where do I go to check in? Where do I go to see, the entrepreneurs or maybe other meetups or whatever is happening? And if I'm in town, where do I go? Where are the out of town people coming? So, working backwards, Union Hall, the building that I'm in now, 38,000 square feet, 3 buildings. You've been here before. It's kind of like Hogwarts. It looks very unassuming from the outside, and then you get inside and it just keeps expanding. So this is a co-working space. Obviously, the current environment has caused us to pivot a little bit. There's not many events that are happening, period. So we used to be like a co-working and event space, but now it's more like a private office and co-working. So I think we'll talk about that, because I think you do have some time reserved for like what we think, from a future statement. But Union Hall, very purposely built in the middle of downtown Cincinnati to be that center of gravity. The branding of Startup Cincy, the collaborative effort of bringing everybody together to share what each other is doing and just to talk about concerns that they have. So having that effort and that collaborative attitude was very intentional. And if I can share my screen real quick, am I allowed to do that?
Yep.
Can everybody see this?
Yes.
So this is a map of the ecosystem. So this is 60 odd, probably 65 different nodes that go around this ecosystem that go from imagining all the way over to growth. And it allows us to see what resources are there for entrepreneurs. It also allows entrepreneurs to see if you're getting help from the brandery, if you are at Mortar, where you fit on that continuum. So this effort of mapping out the ecosystem was intentional, and is something that you don't see in many ecosystems, but we undertook that task. And you can find this on startupcincy.com. But I just wanted to kind of show that real quick, just to my metaphor is that we built a lighthouse on the shore, woke up the next day, and there's 100 ships in the harbor. We didn't realize that, obviously Cincy Tech is successful and one of the leading seed stage investors in the Midwest, but there's more, there's more material than they had the perspective or the capacity to serve. There's a funnel. There's obviously, when we have AssureX and those companies at the narrow end of the funnel, but we got to get people interested in entrepreneurship, and people are doing that. There's SCORE, there's HCDC, et cetera. But what would happen if we all kind of coordinated these efforts and coordinated handoffs and just alerted people to what else is going on in the ecosystem? So that's that second part of the three. But the strategic centerpiece of Cintrifuse is a fund. It's a fund of funds. So we don't make direct investments into startups. We invest in other funds that invest in startups. And through that network effect of drawing people to Cincinnati and drawing attention to Cincinnati has had a, just a exponential effort on bringing other funds to town that can syndicate with our current investors, that can be introduced to our LPs, our limited partners. The people that wrote the checks are the big cos that call Cincinnati home. So that's kind of how it all kind of turns around, kind of cycles back, is that we are an economic development engine supported by the big businesses that call Cincinnati home, that want the region to be successful. And if they can be successful in that process, if they can get introduced to some new technology or new innovative thinking, then that, that's the slot machine lines up all cherries, everything wins. It just, coins come flying out.
That's great. Thank you, Eric. And Don, I would be interested of your perspective, having built what is probably and exited one of the most
successful
Ohio technology companies, probably ever.
One for a while and then cover my meds.
Okay. Yeah. So
number two.
Yeah, top two, which is pretty good. But you mentioned, doing that when some of these kind of ecosystems or just the collaboration necessarily didn't exist. So what has it been like between doing that the first time around and then where you're at today and just the technology excitement happening in Cincinnati?
Well, I can tell you, I used to laugh because we used to talk about how Ohio was very fractured and very competitive and whatnot. And AssureX had investments from QCA in Cincinnati, from Cincy Tech, of course, from OTAF in Columbus, and from North Coast in Cleveland. And they used to talk. It was interesting to see as we were changing things down here, and Cincy Tech was doing things, and Cintrifuse came to be, and whatnot. And I think, to Eric's point, we first started growing a lot of different disparate things that could help people. Even the leadership at AssureX, we tried ourselves to just go mentor people who were trying to start companies, because I just thought it was the right thing to do. I also enjoyed doing it, and there wasn't anybody doing that really. And then I was at an event. I did a fireside chat in Columbus at a tech grind or something, and everybody I ran into up there said, "Oh my God, I can't believe what's going on in Cincinnati. How did you do this?" And then the following week I was up in Cleveland and people were saying the same thing. And I said, "Oh, well, maybe I should take a step back and say, we got a long way to go, but clearly people are seeing that we are actually changing things." And that was maybe 7 years ago. So it was really hard, is the simple answer to, when we started AssureX, we were still living in a world where, kind of in the Midwest, the thought, and this is exactly what happened with AssureX before I was there, a local VC fund used their discovery fund and put 50 grand in and said, "Go start a company." And, so they started a company and it ran out of money instantaneously. And it went dark for like 9 months. And then Mike Venerable from Cincy Tech called me up one day and said, "We're trying to restart this thing. It's great technology from Cincinnati Children's and Mayo Clinic. Do you want to take a look at it?" It's a genetics company in Mason in a strip mall, or it's about to be. And, we luckily had Cincy Tech. We were one of the first investments out of that fund for them. But even Cincy Tech at the time wasn't what Cincy Tech is now. Cincy Tech didn't have the internal resources to help. They didn't have people like John Rice and others there. Cincy Tech itself has grown. Cintrifuse didn't exist. There were a few accelerators, but we weren't really an accelerator type company. And Jim Burns, my co-founder, and I at OhioX basically drove up and down I-75 and I-71 and asked people for money. I mean, there wasn't even any kind of, there was the Ohio Venture Association, but, if you wanted to wait for the one time a year luncheon to meet those people, you had to just know people, right? And that was the really hard, I mean, it's always that way. It's always about people. So I don't want to act like there's this magic now where you just call Eric and he hooks you up with the exact right person who's going to invest in your company or something like that. But there's at least places to go. I mean, besides the fact that we didn't even have all the things on what Eric just showed, even if we had them all, there wouldn't have been that piece of paper to go figure out where any of them were. And so it went from being, I mean, startups are hard, right? I mean, everybody says 1 in 10 succeed, and I'm not sure that statistic's even right? It depends on how you define succeed. 1 in 10 don't go out of business, I think is maybe true. So it's pretty hard to do a startup, and it's really hard to do a startup when you don't have any support around you at all. And so we have City of Mason that does a wonderful job now for us. We have, of course, the greater Cincinnati area. I remember I was in a meeting in a startup Cincy meeting just right down the hall from where Eric's sitting right now a while back. And we actually made the decision that we would no longer say the reason you should start a company here is because we're nice people, your kids can walk to school safely, and it doesn't cost very much to buy a house, right? That there were actual reasons, right, to come here, like amazing, like 400,000 undergrad students within a 1 or 2 hour drive of where we're all sitting right now. Amazing schools that are pumping out research all the time, anywhere from, Ohio State. I know Columbus obviously claims Ohio State, but we've got technology. I have researchers from Ohio State who are on my SAB. You've got kind of the Kentucky, Indiana whole region there, and there's just an amazing, as a matter of fact, there's more research coming out of Cincinnati Children's than we can find people to start companies with. So it's a good problem to have, and it's just so much different than it was even 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago.
Alison, I'd be interested your perspective, starting a company a little bit newer, but then also, as Don was mentioning, you're in the healthcare medical space, but being in a place like Ohio with Cincinnati, obviously Cincinnati Children's and UC, but then driving up either 75 or 71, you're hitting places like Ohio State, the Wexner Medical Center, the Cleveland Clinic, university hospitals. So what is that like for you, just having that physical location where world-class healthcare and hospital systems exist?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think we have a little bit of an interesting perspective because not only is ClearMark a startup ourselves, but we serve a lot of startups, right? So both with Regulatory Mark and our consulting side and ClearMark with our quality management side, we're serving startup companies as well. And I would echo both Eric and Don in their comments that, when we started Regulatory Mark back in 2014, all of a sudden, I did not know that there was this landscape of startup companies here in Cincinnati that are kind of right in your own neighborhood that you don't even know are there. And really quickly, we got introduced to so many med tech companies that are in the area that are doing really innovative and interesting work. And so we're able to support them with their regulatory submissions, with their quality management, and their compliance issues. And, that's quickly become a good portion of our business. Of course, we have clients across the nation and internationally as well, but I always get very excited to work with folks here in Cincinnati who are doing really exciting and innovative things. And I think, Cincinnati in particular is so well suited for med tech industry entrepreneurs, because not only do we have hospitals, as you mentioned, with fantastic research coming out of them, but they're also able to execute on some of the research that companies need to do for compliance issues and things like that. So we can conduct clinical studies at great world-renowned centers here in Cincinnati. We've got resources for R&D and have really great personnel in terms of a talent pool. There's lots of innovation happening. There's lots of great engineering. There's lots of great health tech. And so, the pool of potential employees here is fantastic as well. And I think the whole kind of shift in the culture to this awareness of, startups and innovation and supporting that has been really exciting to see. We've got so many great resources for entrepreneurs, ourselves included. And so that's been really fun to kind of discover in your own community.
That's great. And Eric, maybe that's it's an interest. We've been talking about healthcare and med tech, but what are some, and we'll start with Eric, and others can hop in, of some other sectors or industries that in Cincinnati, the Southwest Ohio region, and just one that I'm sure you can expand on, but Amazon and what they're doing at the airport, and the opportunities something like that presents.
Yeah, I think supply chain is obvious. We're having an event later on this month, a supply chain summit, to talk about some of the issues that we think Cincinnati has a unique right to answer those hard questions about supply chain transparency, about integrity, and all that sort of stuff. But the Amazon example of designating CVG as its prime hub, so all prime packages, maybe not all prime packages, but it's the prime hub for Amazon, was a lure to bring a startup called Amify here to town, invested in by Cincy Tech, as well as Mercury Fund, which is one of the portfolio funds that we've invested in. So it is that proximity to talent, to resources, to that infrastructure that lured them to really take advantage of that and put a headquarters here. They moved from, I believe it was Richmond, Virginia, somewhere on the East Coast, to have a hub here because of that proximity to investment, as well as customers.
And Don, I'd be curious from what you're seeing with other fellow tech executives and the types of business opportunities that you're seeing, and also has that shifted in the past 10 or 15 years? Obviously, the Amazon news is something a little more recent, so those opportunities are newer and evolving. But what are you seeing with your fellow execs?
Well, the Amazon news, by the way, was an amazingly great thing, especially after we lost our Delta hub. But CVG is also the DHL US headquarters also. So I think it's going to become the 7th largest. Eric probably knows better than me, but I read something 6th or 7th largest cargo hub in the world at some point in the future when Amazon finally gets all the gates open. They just announced, I think today, 1,700 new jobs that they're looking to fill. So it's those are big numbers. But Cincinnati, obviously there are, and it's interesting because there were always in Cincinnati kind of marketing and PR companies because of P&G being based here, and Kroger and others. I think that there's some interesting new technologies trying to help companies instead of just a person being a PR person for that came out of P&G. So I've seen a number of those. I'll be honest, I am so heads down in Clarigent right now that I do get called in a lot to talk to a lot of med tech companies. I mean, Cincy Tech alone has invested in 5 or 6 of those in the last few months. There's just a ton of things going on there. And like Eric said, I mean, logistics all of a sudden became the most exciting thing, right? Because you've got the behemoth down there bringing in however many hundreds of planes every night here soon. And we already had an interesting, I mean, there's some good companies in Mason that have grown, and one just got acquired a couple of years ago. That's a logistics company that had worked with Amazon. There's a lot of logistics around here that were already here, that you think about just even like trucking companies that are up the highway from us and things like that. So there was already kind of an infrastructure for that. We didn't need Amazon to come to do that, but obviously Amazon coming was a big deal. And then, if anybody really wants to see, I mean, there's so many good VCs now in the area, but, look at some of their websites at some of the recent portfolio companies that they've added. It's it's good stuff. I mean, we were at the at Cincy Tech's Big Breakfast. And if you haven't been to a big breakfast, you should go to a big breakfast. There's a lot of good stuff going on there. And I remember the first one, I was at the first one because we were, a portfolio company, and there were 5 tables and there were about 20 people there. So it was pretty much Cincy Tech talking to their own portfolio companies, right? And I think they have 800 at this last breakfast or something. So, and what's really interesting is to walk around and see the quality of those startups, right? I mean, of the 5 tables that were at the big breakfast, the first big breakfast, I think AssureX is the only one that still exists, right? So, and today you look at that list and those companies that are there, and every single one of them, you can understand what their exit path is and why they're successful. So just a lot of good quality. We don't have to just throw up little companies that we give $10,000 to so that we keep them alive. A lot of that was going on 20 years ago in town too, to say we had an interesting startup community. Now we've got really great companies in addition to the resources to help them.
Allison, we were talking previously about, you all your company does work not just in Cincinnati, but across Ohio, and I'm sure beyond. But I'd be curious in your perspective on some of what we were just talking about, but also just collaboration and opportunities for people, and you're in med tech in that space, but with Ohio's hospital systems, research institutions, and just kind of your experience with that, and then the opportunities that can present, because Ohio's this really unique state in that we don't have kind of one major metro area. We're really spread out. And so from Cincinnati to Cleveland is 4.5 hours, which is, that's a drive, but at the same time, a really healthy Cleveland is great for Cincinnati and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we're seeing innovation come out of all of these major centers. So when you look at, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, each of these has really thriving med tech and health tech community. And we're seeing a lot more organizations now, at least in my experience, around kind of bringing some of that innovation that's been happening inside those hospitals and spinning that out and making that into companies, where they can bring these new innovations to the public more easily. And I think that's really exciting, not just from kind of the health perspective, but from the business perspective and from the community perspective as well. So that's a lot of exciting things that we're doing. I think, as Don mentioned, being an entrepreneur, having a startup, particularly a med tech startup, is really hard. And we're seeing more of these resources in our communities kind of put into place to help those companies thrive and kind of meet their goals and being able to release product and help the community. And so that's been really exciting. And I think, our company has helped facilitate research studies at the major institutions across the state, and working with those institutions has been fantastic. So you're getting really world-class research that you can then leverage, not just for your marketing studies, but for your FDA submissions and all of these different things. For entrepreneurs, it becomes a really exciting opportunity. And I think, being here in Cincinnati or Columbus or Cleveland, and being close to these study centers is so beneficial for the companies that are utilizing that resource.
That's really interesting. And I think it made me think of the Cincinnati Innovation District, which right before COVID, and I mean, it was probably in March, I think, probably a week or so before everything started to really shut down. The governor, lieutenant governor, Jobs Ohio, were joined by pretty much a who's who of Cincinnati's business and technology and hospital system communities, to make a really interesting announcement that there's going to be a big investment, both in time and money and expansion. And I don't know, Eric, are you very familiar with that? If maybe you want to share a little bit about that and just how some of those, physical space collaborations and what all is happening there.
Yeah, it's really centered around the University of Cincinnati. And it's over $100 million that Jobs Ohio is going to invest in that area and focus on jobs, focus on a lot of the things that Don talked about, of this research that is kind of You can imagine it like the last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? With all these boxes of stuff, like these are all these ideas that we have that, we don't have the time or the talent to make them into businesses, but if somebody could. So imagine if you could just draw a rope around that and say, this is what's happening in this district. So you're combining the talent from the University of Cincinnati and the hospitals, not just Children's, but also UC Health and Christ and Bethesda and et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be amazing of what happens when you concentrate on that. And I think that's the thesis, is that there's a proven track record, there's proven best practices when regions and towns do that and put a concerted effort to that. I think it needs to be measured. It will be, but we're very in the early stages. But that's one of the. I'm jumping around here a little bit, but when you talk about the success of ecosystems and how do you measure success of an ecosystem, there's a lot of different ways you can measure it. Some of them are the fostering of tech and tech-enabled companies, venture dollars. But then there's also lifestyle businesses and just people that don't want to go through an accelerator, don't want to give up their equity. So there's a bunch of different things. I think jobs is obviously a key component to it. I think that's going to be, at the end of the day, it has to, it has to mean that people are employed, but meaningful jobs. So it's not quantity, maybe quality over quantity, a bunch of different things. But having an innovation district is a huge step, and having the literal investment and the endorsement from the state to say, we want this to happen here, specifically here, is just a big vote of confidence for what's going on in the region.
And Don, you had mentioned earlier that there's just so much research and so much of this, that there aren't enough operators. There aren't enough of the business people to go out and run with it. And I've heard that from other places around the state, that they have the researchers, they have the PhDs, but what do you think some keys are to increasing that pipeline, or just showcasing that it's an incredible opportunity either for people in town? And Alison, you went from businesses to launching your own businesses, seeing opportunity, but to get to the point where there are enough operators that can go out and take some of these ideas and spend them out of our research institutions or hospitals or universities.
I think there's at least two categories I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, one is just don't lose the people in the first place, right? It's funny. I used to be a guest lecturer at UC for their honors entrepreneurship program. And one of the things that the professor who ran that used to talk to me about all the time was make sure that you actually put slides in your presentation that talk about why people should not graduate and go with their ideas to somewhere else, that there actually is a way to create a company here in Cincinnati. And, there was less and less having to tell that to people over time, although I do think it's still, people graduate from those advanced programs. I'm on the board of the it's got some really long name at UC, but anyway, the Advanced Statistics graduate program. And they're constantly, it's interesting because they have such a good program that they bring people in to Cincinnati for the program. And then the trick is to get them to stay, right? But the other thing is getting people to come back. So Tim at Refinery, that was one of the thesis, that was part of the thesis. I helped him start Refinery back in the day, in between OhioX and Clarigent. And the whole idea there was, he's a traditional VC, but he's also got a program where the idea is to go find people who grew up in Ohio and went off and maybe ran a company or was number 3 at a startup on the West Coast or something, and lure them back, right, with all the resources we have here and the technology, and bring them into a UC or a OSU or Cincinnati Children's and say, spend 3 months here. We'll help you with this, and find a technology here that's super exciting to you to start a company with. As success breeds success, and I know that's obvious, but I say this all the time. Nobody knows how to run a startup until they've run a startup. Period. So you're going to make mistakes in your first few. If you can get people, I'm sure you can imagine how many offers I had after the AssureX sale, right? Because once you've done it, hopefully you're smart enough to not make the same mistakes. You make all new mistakes, but at least you know how to recover from them and whatnot. And so finding those people. So the more exits we have, the more successful startups we have, those people go and do new startups, right? There are at least, off the top of my head, I can think of 5 people plus my co-founder at Clarigent who have been part of startups in the last, 5 people that I basically recommended to companies like Hive Network and others in town that were, my number 3, my 4th employee at AssureX or whatever. So, if you're a single digit numbered employee in a startup that goes for 10 years and sells for a bunch, you've been exposed to a lot. And so you're super helpful to that next startup. And if you haven't done that before, there's going to be a big learning curve. So the more success we have, the more those people can double down. They can also invest, right? So, I've invested personally in a few companies in town. I've obviously invested in Clarigent. It's nice to not have 3 mortgages on the house to keep AssureX going like we did at one point, and instead be able to throw some cash into a company or into some other interesting companies around town.
If I can piggyback onto that real quick, Chris, just you
Please.
look at Indianapolis as a good example of how that cycle works with the exact target kind of trajectory of the folks that built that company, took it to IPO, got bought by Salesforce, and then that was a very nice exit for them. They became the angels, and the next entrepreneurs and the people that were kind of in the middle management now became the next ones that they wanted to fund. So the cycle is really playing out there. Now there's 2 or 3 Techstars accelerators there, maybe 2 now. They've got just a wealth of talent, a lot of good organizations. Powder Keg, TechPoint is another one that's doing some great things in Indianapolis. But success breeds success, as Don said, and every ecosystem is looking for that model that somebody can have that success and then teach others and be the ones that kind of model the way.
And that can only happen over time, Eric, to your point, right? I mean, I used to tell people, I used to tell this to the council members in the city of Mason when I was standing up in front of them explaining why they to put more money into acquiring land and building startups, because they've done a good job. You have to put all the things that we've been talking about on this call in place to help what's going on. But at the end of the day, until there's success and exactly what Eric just said, and until people become angels, right? Which I was willing to do after AssureX and a few of the other executives were. And then also it frees up those people below us to then move up and be the next us in all those startups. That takes time. I mean, and so you have and some and some staying power, right? You can't, and we've been lucky that that's happened, right? You can't just have P&G and Duke and a few others throw in, $10 million each or $30 million each or whatever the heck they threw in, buy a building, and then say 5 years later, well, nothing's happened. Well, 5 years is like that in a startup, right? I mean, you got to wait until we actually accomplish something. I used to always say, Silicon Valley wasn't planned, right? I mean, you don't take $1 trillion and go around all over the United States and find all the best companies and say, move here all at once. Now look what we have, right? And we even make all the streets, how exciting technology and everything. You build it organically, and you can make that happen faster by having the resources. But you still, if it takes 10 years to build a company and sell it, then the fastest you can create a new company today and sell it is 10 years from now, not 1 year from now, by putting more money into it.
Absolutely. I agree, Don. And one of the things that actually really excites me kind of about this whole conversation and the startup ecosystem in general here is the way we can kind of accelerate that as much as we can with technology also. So one of the things that I'm excited about is, how we can help with technology, enable entrepreneurs and enable these businesses to kind of have an easier pathway. Of course, it's still never easy. That's one of the things that we're trying to do at ClearMark with med tech companies is leverage technology to make that design and development pathway easier for medical devices so that we can help folks like the technologies coming out of the Cleveland Clinic or UC to actually make that to market. And so that's something that's really exciting to me. And I think in Cincinnati specifically, we have such a great tech community. We've got Xavier Health, we've got the 1819 Innovation Hub. And so, across the board, not just in kind of med tech, which is where we are, but technology in general, I think, leveraging that to kind of make these businesses more efficient and get more startups across the finish line has been really exciting to see as well.
Thank you, Alison. And as we have about 10 minutes or so folks can feel free to throw in questions in the chat. And I know there's been some interaction. So thanks, Eric, for sending that link out. But as we're looking to kind of start wrapping up, we'll do a series of kind of hypotheticals or quick hitters, if you will. The first one, and we can start with you, Eric, and go to Don and then Alison. But I guess it's kind of two, your option, either if you were mayor or governor for a day or king or queen for a day, and you can make whatever you want happen to help, to just help startups, help tech, help grow, whatever that is. Or the other one, if you could put on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the front page of TechCrunch, something that maybe people don't hear enough about that's happening in Cincinnati or with your companies that should be known more. And maybe it was something already discussed today. But what would you get out there and make sure that, everyone's hearing about this if you can shout from the rooftop?
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take the first one. And specifically where you got me thinking was on the policy side and how we can make it easier for people, lower barriers to entry, create less friction to start a business, make it demystify it a little bit to encourage those policymakers to encourage entrepreneurship and as a viable career option. And I think a lot of it's great that we have these big co's that call Cincinnati home. But it also is a cinder block sometimes tied around our ankles because these people have comfortable jobs and don't want to take risks. I say frequently, our best and brightest go to these big co's. They work for Fifth Third Bank or Great American Insurance or Procter & Gamble. And in a town like Boulder, the best and the brightest work for a startup. There is no option there. And I'm being purposefully hyperbolic, but they working for a startup is something that you want to do. It's kind of like our best and brightest, at least our best in North America, our best and brightest male athletes play football or basketball, but in Portugal they play soccer. That's the culture that we need to change. So I think from a policy standpoint, some of those things could help of understanding what happens when we foster entrepreneurship and not just tech and tech enabled. That's one sliver of it. And I think that gets, there was one of the questions here about do the funds that we invest only in startups. And I think the nomenclature of startups needs to be clarified because, technology will be a part of it when you're a startup. But all startups are small businesses, but not all small businesses are startups. And I think that from focusing on being an entrepreneurial, connected, and intentionally diverse and focus on equity is important for a thriving community.
Thanks, Eric. Don?
Yeah, I definitely think, policy and regulation, without getting too political, I mean, those are big problems for small businesses, right? I mean, there's both policy from the kinds of things we have to do, how much time I spend doing government-related things, especially in a healthcare-related startup. versus what I'd like to be doing, which is innovating more and getting my product out on Friday, and, you know, saving people's lives. I mean, I get there's got to be some. I also truly get, you know, look, when you get a grant from the NIH or when you get money from government, there's accountability, and I'm glad there's accountability, right? I mean, I'm a taxpayer. I mean, we shouldn't just be throwing money out there, but you know, I think that I think we've done a pretty good job in Ohio. I think there's more work to be done around that, specifically in Ohio. But I can say from somebody who dealt with trying to get Third Frontier funds, say 12 years ago, that was a big, I mean, you might as well just hire somebody on your team to do that all day long. But that's gotten a lot better because we stopped thinking of it like a bank, right? I mean, a VC is not a bank, right? VCs take on a lot of risk. Banks aren't supposed to take on a lot of risk when it comes to these types of things. So, you know, thinking more like entrepreneurial, and I like what Eric said right there at the end too about equity. There, you know, most people, I'd say when we started AssureX, most people that we hired who were from here had no idea what a stock option even was, let alone what kind of questions they should ask or why that should be exciting, right? And so making people understand that, you know, it's a double-edged sword, like Eric said. I mean, if you've worked for P&G for any period of time, or Duke, or any, I mean, these are all great companies, right? Fifth Third, you probably make enough money that your husband or wife is pretty excited that you can pay bills and go on vacations and you know, have as many kids as you want and send them to private school. And, you know, all of a sudden you go over to a startup and maybe you don't get paid for the first 6 months, or maybe you make half of what you made because you just have to do that, right? We don't get, you know, my girlfriend works for a company that started with a $2 billion investment from a major company. Well, I told her, you know, that's not a startup. It might be a startup because you only have a few employees, but that's a very different startup than, you know, getting the first $50,000 check from Cincinnati Tech to get things going and then work towards the you know, the seed round. You know, if you got $2 billion in the bank, you can actually pay people what they should make. Right. So, you know, so we have the good, you know, I guess the one other thing I would say, and I know we're running out of time, is that it would be kind of a plug for kind of what we do. But I mean, in a lot of the health tech here, we have put a lot of people, and especially children, in a really bad place right now. I mean, we, you know, most of what we're doing right now, it's not all our product can do, but we do a lot of in-school, on-campus therapy. We don't do the therapy, the therapists do it, but our technology helps them do that. It's listening to the voice of people and seeing if they're suicidal or whatnot. And, you know, taking everybody and putting them in their houses and taking them out of social settings and whatnot. We've got a huge behavioral health crisis about to happen, even worse than it already was in the United States. So anybody out there who has ideas to help with that, bring them to us because we'll help get them out there.
Thank you, Don. Alison?
Yeah, so I think I would echo, you know, both Don and Eric's comments regarding regulation. Working with the FDA as we do, we're kind of full-time regulation people. And, you know, obviously regulation needs to happen. We need to have it there, but I think, you know, there are ways we could have some smarter regulation in place. And I think sometimes those are barriers to folks. You know, again, we work in health tech. So in that arena, especially, starting a business is hard enough. When you're starting a business in med tech or health tech, it can be overwhelming. And, you know, it can stop a business in their tracks. Where I think we're seeing a lot of movement is in places like, hopefully, our ClearMark system, helping people navigate that and get through some of those regulation and compliance issues much easier, so that people can focus on their businesses and, you know, their innovation and their products in particular, without having to spend undue amounts of time on that regulation. So I think, you know, that would be a great place to start, is kind of smarter regulation. And if I was going to put something on the front page of the newspaper, I would just really encourage all the entrepreneurs out there, because it is definitely difficult being an entrepreneur myself, I can speak from experience, but so worthwhile. I think, I've worked in industry and then in kind of the startup world, and just to encourage anybody on this call who is an innovator and is thinking of starting their own business, it's truly gratifying. And I think that it's an experience not to be missed. So just wanted to encourage folks there as well.
Thank you. And so we have 3 minutes left. We'll do one final quick round robin. We'll go with you. We'll go again, Eric, Don, and Alison to end. But for people, maybe they're in Cincinnati and haven't checked it out, but for those of us in Columbus and Dayton and Toledo and Cleveland and elsewhere on here today, if we're coming into town for the first time, or where are you taking us to lunch? Where should people stop for the best coffee or brewery to kind of get the real Cincinnati experience? And maybe it's Skyline.
Yeah, no, I'll just go with brewery, and I'll just throw out Rheingeist. I think it's very iconic, a very quintessential kind of the startup scene here. Cincy Made is on the cans, so right down the street and over the Rhine. I would definitely, I do take people there as a starting point.
That's great. Don?
Well, that would be pretty much the same with me. Although it isn't. So I'm a traditionalist. So I mean, if you come into Cincinnati, you have to try the chili, because you have to decide whether you love it or you hate it, right? Because there is no in between, right? So if you want to, you got to stop and get a cheese coney or a three-way or something. But there's also, I know, OTR and the banks have some fabulous, and the banks especially too, with the view of the river. And I always say, don't forget Northern Kentucky, because you can, sit on the river and actually look at Cincinnati, right? But don't forget the suburbs too. There are really good, Cincinnati's always been known as a really good kind of foodie place. And we've then I think we kind of just got, like Cincinnati tends to do, we just got kind of bold and kept doing the same things. And now we've, over the last 5 or 10 years, there's been much more interesting restaurants being created in the suburbs and in OTR and on the banks. So.
Thanks, Don. Alison?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're going out to eat, you got to go to OTR. There's so many great places to choose from there, right? But, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Grater's. You have to get ice cream while you're here. You got to go to Grater's. So that's the place to go.
I'll absolutely second the Graters. And
yeah, the problem is
that
once you get Graters, then you'll have to have it dry iced and sent to wherever you live.
Yeah, it makes a great gift.
Yes, it does. Yeah, I'm a big Graters guy, which is has been a little tough during quarantine, because not out and as active as I have been. But thank you to Alison, Don, and Eric for sharing your work and your expertise and your words with us all today. Thank you to everyone who has joined. Appreciate you taking time, and I'm certainly hungry now that our lunch hour is over. So we'll look forward to we're recording this. We'll post this online. Hopefully, there's been some connections made. So take a look at the OhioX LinkedIn, for instance. We've tagged Alison, Don, and Eric and their organizations and companies. So if you want to learn more, please feel free to, reach out to them and follow along what's happening in Cincinnati. Thanks again to HMB, our partner and sponsor on this series, hmb.net. Or hmbnet.com is their website if you're interested in checking it out more. But really appreciate everyone for being on. And again, Alison, Don, and Eric, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day. Bye-bye, all.